Welcome to the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. If you want effective and actionable tips to simplify the overwhelm of launching and managing your podcast, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Verity Songon, podcast manager, launch strategist, and host of a Top 100 podcast. I'm really excited to have you here, so without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. And in today's episode, what I want to be talking about is how to create or how to have even a successful podcast. And I'm pretty sure this is not what you are going to expect me to talk about at all. So I'm really excited for this particular episode. But the reason why I don't think it's going to be what you expect is because, first of all, before you can decide whether or not you've got a successful podcast, you've got to take it back to what is it that you define as success. Now, this is a really important thing to do because for some people, success is going to be getting in the charts. It could be that the podcast is working really well as part of their marketing sales funnel. It could be that you are just able to share your message, and it could be that you are such an introvert or you're so worried about speaking that actually success to you is turning up every week or once a month or twice a month, whatever your schedule is. Success to you could be just turning up and publishing that next episode. Success to you could be that there are 20 people in your niche and 10 of them all listen to your podcast. You've captured like half of your global audience, for example. You've got to consider, what is it that you define as success? Because so often we are caught up in these metrics and these numbers, and you kind of think to yourself, well, unless I have 10,000 downloads per episode, my podcast isn't successful. But that's not necessarily true, because you could have thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads per episode, but you're maybe not making any money from your podcast. And if your whole point of your podcast is to make money from it, it doesn't matter how many thousands of downloads you've got per episode. If you're not making money, you've not hit your goal. Equally, you could have maybe only 20 downloads per episode. And just as a little pointer, around half of all podcasts will only get a maximum of 29 downloads within their first 7 days of that particular episode coming out. So just bear that in mind. If you're beating yourself up thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not getting all the downloads that I want, I'm not getting these thousands of downloads, on average, just under 50% of podcasts will only get 29 downloads per episode in their first 7 days of releasing that episode. So do just bear that in mind. But the point that I am making is that even if you only have 20 downloads per episode, if 15 of those people who downloaded that episode go on to buy from you, surely that is more successful than 2,000 people listening to your episode and none of them buying from you. Your goal for your podcast might not even be to make money. It could be that you're showing up and you are telling your story. It could be that you're showing up to your particular audience and you're just turning up to have fun and you're building a community. Well, in that case, success is going to look very different to you, because your success might be that your Instagram DMs are full of people saying that they found your advice really useful. It could be that your TikTok is growing and you are building a community on TikTok. It could be that your podcast is generating any kind of community on Circle, on Twitter, whatever it is. But the point is that to you, a success is having that close-knit community. So what I want you to do for the purpose of this episode is, before you go any further, before you listen to another episode, before you put in place anything else for your podcast, what I want you to do is grab a pen and paper or the Notes app on your phone, whatever it is, and I really want you to consider to yourself, what is it that I define as success as far as my podcast goes? And I want you to really be honest with yourself. If it's about making money, that is absolutely fine. But quite often we can be a bit funny about talking about money. And, sometimes people can feel quite selfish or feel like it's a bit crude to talk about the fact that, yes, I actually want to make money from this. There's nothing wrong with that, particularly if it's a bit part of your business marketing strategy or part of your business sales funnel. But what I want you to do is just be really honest with yourself. What is it that you define as this podcast, your particular podcast, being successful? Is it around the number of downloads? Is it about the amount of subscribers? Is it about the amount of sales that you make from your podcast? Is it about the community? What is it that makes your podcast successful in your mind. Because once you've got that clear, once you've decided what the success is, that's when you can look at your action plan and your strategy going forward. Because once you know how you're defining success, you can turn that into a goal. You're saying, right, I want to make X amount of downloads, I want to do X amount of sales through my podcast, whatever it is. You can then strategize how you're going to achieve what you have defined as success. So I think that's a really, really important thing to, it's a really important exercise. Go grab yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, whatever it is that you want. And yeah, just really consider to yourself, what is it that you define success when it comes to your podcast? And I'm going to give you 2 examples before I leave. The first is with my other podcast, the Confident CEO podcast. Now, to me, that one is all about download numbers. You'll see me talk quite a lot about hitting the charts for the Confident CEO podcast and download numbers. And to me, that's really important, because for that particular message, what's happening with the Confident CEO podcast is we are talking about all of the topics that I just don't feel are being talked about enough in the female entrepreneurial space. So for me, the more I get into the charts, the more downloads I get. To me, that is success, because I'm getting the message to as many people as I can about these different topics that I feel are not being covered enough. So that's how I measure success in that respect. But for this particular podcast, the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, this actually acts as part of my marketing and sales funnel into my podcast management business and agency. So therefore, I measure success for this podcast very, very differently as to how I measure success for the Confident CEO podcast. So I hope you found that useful. As I said, it's really important to not measure your own success by how somebody else deems their podcast to be successful. Really consider, what is it that you define as success as far as your podcast goes, because then, as I said, you can action plan and set goals to making sure that you achieve that later on. Hope you enjoyed that. I love talking to you about success in your podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.